Everybody, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me on another episode of the Red Pill Diaries. This is the platform for you if you want truth. This is a no holds barred, straightforward, in your face, down your throat truth. All right. Now you might hear my voice raspy. I don't know what happened. I woke up this morning. I had no voice. I had to gargle warm water with salt. And so that's why you hear the raspy part. But as we wait for my friend and colleague, Carl, to join us, we're going to jump into a lot of things. Hopefully he'll join us in the next minute or so. I just hit him up, letting him know, hey, we're live, we're waiting on you. So everything is cool. Let me go in the chat real quick. I got to give a shout out to my guy, Joel, and Carl is in the building right now, everybody. Carl is in the building. I'm going to bring him up on the screen. But first, I want to salute Joel Brad for being the first in the chat. Thank you so much, Joel, for supporting the channel and for coming in. Now I got to bring my friend, my colleague, and this guy is a no-holds-barred type of guy. He's going to put it in your face, whether you like it or not. This is my friend, Carl Zha. How's it going, man?
Hey, Rashid. Always good to see you.
Likewise, man. Carl, we just had the election. We have one side panicking, and we have some maneuvering going on. We already seen some of the neocons come out of the woodworks, like Pompeo, Cotton, and a lot of other people. What does this mean for America with the Democrats panicking and blaming everybody? And then Trump team looks like they may incorporate some more warhawks into his cabinet.
You know, I'm happy Kamala Harris lost because this is exactly what Democratic Party needs to know. This is exactly the message they need to receive, is that they keep on doing the same thing they have been doing, they're going to lose. You know, by keeping moving to the right to Republican side, they're not going to win. They're not going to. If you look at the numbers, Kamala Harris, they basically, compared to 2020 election, she lost like 15 million voters. Those are the formerly Democrat voters who stay at home, or maybe they voted Trump because you know. So I'm glad this happened. You know, genocide is not it should not be condoned, and I'm glad that happened. But that said, I don't think fundamentally the U.S. foreign policy is going to change. I'm with John Mearsheimer on this one because the deep state is still in charge, folks. Yes. Trump says he's gonna drain the swamp, you know, like clean slate. That's not gonna happen. We saw what happened with the first Trump term. The deep state defeated Trump. He came to power claiming he's for peace, non-interventionist policy. I mean, granted, he didn't start any new wars, but he just continued all the old wars, including bombing Syria. And I still remember on CNN the CNN anchor, I don't know if what's his name. He was like getting all emotional when the U.S. launched cruise missile to strike Syria, and he was like, "Wow, that's the most presidential moment I felt for Trump." This is kind of the bloodthirsty U.S. establishment. They won war, and Trump is not going to win on this one. And I don't think he will even try to fight the deep state. He came to power, promising peace. He said he will end the Ukraine war within 24 hours. I don't know if they're going to. That means 24 hours from the time he won the election. I mean, it's already been 24 hours, or whether by the time he take office. But I don't think that's going to happen. There's no way the entrenched NATO bureaucracy will allow any deviation from the script. And that said, there's a lot of panicking right now in the European capitals, in Japan, Korea, Australia, all the U.S. vassal states, because the difference between Trump and Biden is that Biden is like, okay, let's build coalition, let's rally our troops, rally our vassal states together, so we can form this alliance to confront Russia, China, and Iran. Whereas Trump is like, all right, y'all all have to pay. Every one of you have to pay for the U.S. empire. Someone like some country like Japan, I believe they will probably pay up because Japan already paid for the majority of the U.S. occupation of Japan. So what's another 30% for them? But and I think the same thing is going to happen for Europe too. They're all they all have no backbones. All the European leaders, in the end, they're all gonna come back and grovel to Trump. Like, we're sorry we said bad things about you, but please let us sit back in. We're your loyal vassals. Yeah. So, but in the end, it's a deep state that's still going to be in charge. I don't see, you already, like you mentioned, like Pompeo is already angling for a position. So, then it's just going to be a replay of Trump term number one. I don't hold great hope for drastic change in the U.S. foreign policy. I think that's in the hands of the professionals, right? And the Pentagon will definitely be driving, in the driving seat. Remember, in the first term, Trump heavily depended on a portion of the Pentagon, of the people in the military. I think that will continue to happen because, like, Trump, he doesn't have people. He doesn't have like at the end of the day, he doesn't have people he can rely on. The only people he can find is the same people in the establishment. So nothing is going to change.
I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about, let us not forget that Kamala, she was not prepared for this moment. And so we see that in a lot of the people who had already known that this hurriedly put together candidate was not ready for this moment. But I want to go back to Trump. Let us not forget, when people say he didn't start any wars, when people say that, I say, the hell you say, because he committed an act of war against Iran. It was because Iran chose to restrain itself that there was no war between the United States. But he did do that. He bombed Syria. And let us not forget that he also was the one, because we're looking at the Ukrainian crisis. Remember that he said that he can bring this to a close in 24 hours. But it was his upping the funding and upping the weapons sales to him that instigated the special military operation that nobody talks about. And I want to say this, Carl, because I want you to give me your rundown on it. And when you do it, my lights kind of fell a little bit, so I'm gonna black my screen for a minute while you're talking, and I'm going to try to fix my lights behind here. So, I noticed before Trump was president-elect, he was angling for this Iran conflict in such a way. And what I say is that out of the blue, he said that Iran was trying to assassinate him. And then when they asked him about it, he said, well, he had no credible evidence. It was just a hunch, and somebody and the intelligence agencies told him that. And I noticed that right after that, it was brought up again right before the election. And then today, on RT, they're reporting that the U.S. is now accusing Iran. They have arrested a few people, and they're accusing Iran of trying to assassinate Donald Trump. Now, everybody don't get. I don't think that assassination and killing of people is fair. But if we're going to be right about this, it was Trump that assassinated the person that was supposed to become the next Ayatollah of Iran. So let's not. But in this article, it says, U.S. accuses Iran of plotting to kill Trump. An Iranian national has been charged with murder for hire. An Iranian national and 2 Americans have been charged with involvement in a murder for hire plot to assassinate President-elect Donald Trump, as well as an Iranian dissident, the U.S. Department of Justice has announced. Now, that's eerily similar to all of the accusations when Biden came in about Russia's belligerence and Russia involvement in trying to dictate U.S. policy. Are we seeing a repeat of a justification to go to war with Iran?
Well, so, the Republican and Democrats are basically two faces of the war party, but sometimes their priorities are different, right? I mean, even during the election, Trump and the Republicans, they want to wind down on Ukraine, and they want to concentrate the resources on confronting China. Whereas the Democrat want to stay the course, fully committed in Ukraine, etc. But where they do not differ is the Middle East. Both the Democrats and the Republicans, they are fully on the side of Netanyahu in supporting Israel committing atrocity in the Middle East. And one of the big targets for Israel is Iran. Netanyahu said this before. He wanted to take out Syria. He wanted to take out Iraq. He wanted to take out Iran. He believes these are existential threat for existence of Israel. And that's exactly what happened with the Iraq war. United States took out Saddam. And then under Obama, the largest CIA operation, Timber Sycamore, to support jihadists to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. Iran is the last man standing, and I think the U.S. is gonna Iran is gonna be in the crosshair no matter what, because in going after Iran, the U.S. interests and Israel's interests are fully aligned. They want to further destabilize the region because U.S. wants to prove itself as the provider of security, ironically, in the Middle East. I mean, that's how U.S. positioned itself to a lot of the wealthy Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Qatar, etc. U.S. The Fifth Fleet, it's based in Qatar, and U.S. value proposition for these wealthy monarchies is that, hey, we are the only ones with a military with a will to stay and be guarantor of peace. By being guarantor of the peace, meaning we're not going to blow you up if you continue to invest in U.S. dollars, in U.S. treasuries, and U.S. stock market. Because, we have been talking about the dollarization. Saudi has been flirting with dropping petrodollar, switching to petro yuan. And that's a no-no. I mean, U.S. financial domination is one of the strongest pillar of U.S. hegemony right now. And that rests on the dollar hegemony. The U.S. will never allow a disappearance of petrodollar. So this is by stirring up tension with Iran, by supporting Israel to destabilize the Middle East, U.S. is positioning itself like, hey, we look at what kind of trouble we can create for you if you go against me. This is like the mafia mentality. I mean, if you think of a U.S. as a mob, it makes perfect sense. It's like, look at what kind of havoc we can bring to this region. If you don't do what I say, and especially U.S. didn't like this China broker Saudi Iran deal because that would have bring peace to the region, and the last thing United States want is peace. The U.S. goal right now is to light fire all around the globe in Europe, in Middle East, and possibly in East Asia. So U.S. homeland, the United States appear to be this calm, this oasis of calm amidst of all the world light on fire. So all the foreign money, foreign capital will continually be invested in United States asset, in U.S. so real estate, U.S. Stock market, U.S. treasuries to boost the U.S. economy. And I think I just saw a statistic earlier today that says the U.S. GDP, which we know is like overinflated, but U.S. GDP composed about 20% of the world GDP. But the U.S. stock market composed of 60% of the U.S. Capital market. So all the money is in the U.S. invested. That's how U.S. government want. And the way to ensure that, they're trying to blow up everywhere else to destabilize all across the world. So you have no choice. All these wealthy oil sheiks in the Gulf, you have no choice but park your money in U.S. Don't even think about trading for RMB for Chinese money because we can get you. We can get you. And I think this is a basic U.S. strategy in the Middle East right now. So they have a very, vested interest to at least keep the tension with Iran, if not outright going to war.
I'm going to play a clip I played on the last show that has, it's almost like you and Medvedev were thinking the same thoughts about how the United States creates chaos. But before I do that, I was thinking about the situation of the assassination, the allegation. And for those who may say, well, this is the deep state trying to force Trump to confront Iran, that may have had a little credence, but Trump was saying this before the election. So for him to double back down on it and this to happen, this can't just be that. It has to be a little bit more than that, especially with the huge buildup of troops, the huge buildup of warplanes and warships in the whole region, and the threats from the United States, even to Iraq. The United States demands that Iraq not allow its airspace and its territory for a retaliatory strike by Iran on Israel, but the United States cleared a corridor for Israel to launch strikes on Iran. This cannot go on forever. And this is what Medvedev had to say about the situation here.
Americans always try to rule by creating crises on the planet. This was the case, well, at least in the 20th century, and it continues that way in the 21st. When the Soviet Union collapsed, America felt that it had no equal at all after the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. So the more crises they create, the better they think the situation is for America. Well, they've created a crisis with these sanctions. What happens? It's all very simple. The Americans make money. America, as always, feels good. It makes money from weapons supplies and by allocating money to its defense industry. Sure enough, some of that money gets stolen in Ukraine or somewhere else. Still, though, it means that the defense industry and a lot of other economic mechanisms in the United States continue to work. Moreover, a lot of businesses have been persuaded to move over to the United States from Europe, where it has become unprofitable to work. That is, the Americans are getting what they want at the price of more blood and casualties. This is why Americans are engaging in feeding the war. But that system is coming to an end. That's why they feel the world is falling out from under their feet, and they're resisting it in every way possible. You've mentioned BRICS here, and there's also the SCO, as well as other regional unions. There are Asian unions that are very important in today's world and where America has no say at all. It is seen as hostile there, even though those unions were not originally created as anti-American. In fact, I find the idea of the global South and these kind of unions very promising. Why? The Americans and their satellites keep saying, you are violating the rule-based order. But when you ask them what that order is, and I've deliberately picked through legal texts, studied them, it's incomprehensible. It's not clear what the order is and who approved it. It's really just an idea of the United States and its allies, well, mostly in NATO, of how best to do business in the world. So it's not a written document, not an international convention, it's not a UN act or any other act, it's not the UN Charter, it's just something, an order that they think is right. And once you're out of this order, you're a perpetrator. Of course, this is a very unstable system that is bound to collapse sooner or later. And those inside that system will suffer the most from its collapse. I'm absolutely sure about that.
So it seems like you, me, and Medvedev were on the same wavelengths on this. What do you have to say about that clip there?
I mean, I love Medvedev. He says all kind of things that Putin maybe can't say in public, right? but he just says all those things that's inconvenient, all the inconvenient truth that you can't say in diplomatic circles. But I mean, where's the lie? Where's the lie? That's exactly how U.S. behave. What rule-based international order? Where are those rules? Who write them? Who writes a rule-based international order? I mean, right now, U.S. is destroying all the international forum, international institution that United States itself helped to build after World War II. Because now they realize, you know what, this is not working for me, guys. So I'm washing my hands of this. And this starting from UN to like right now, especially with the Trump election, I mean, like the Biden at least lip service to kind of international cooperation. Like Trump's like, no. You all have to pay. So it'll be interesting to see what one thing I like about Trump winning is because Trump is a wild card, so he throws a wrench into the well-oiled deep state machine. Even though I think in the end deep state will win, but there's going to be a momentary chaos. Everything is going to try to figure out where they fit into this picture. And but back to the election, man. That's Kamala Harris. You can't find a field a worse candidate. Imagine, like, at least she's basically Hillary 2.0, right? She's like the blackface Hillary, and the only, but Hillary actually won the popular vote. Kamala didn't even won the popular vote, and why? Because they at the last minute decide to do a bait and switch and to get rid of Biden and prop up Kamala Harris without a real convention, without a real primary. She was like the party anointed candidates talking about democracy, right? And the DNC is trying to shove her down everybody's throat. And this is a candidate. Remember, she polled during the 2020 Democratic primary, which also was rigged by DNC, by the way. Back then she polled under Andrew Yang. Who remember even Andrew Yang? Under Andrew Yang. And the only reason she was chosen as VP candidate by Biden is because she poses no threat to Biden. And also Biden is trying to get the black vote by including her. That's their ploy. And what's more ridiculous is right now all the Democrats are the blame game has already started. They're trying to blame everybody. They're trying to blame the black people. They're trying to blame Latinos. They're trying to blame Arabs. They're trying to blame Asians. I mean, look, guys, and they're all going full racist about it.
Yep.
Everybody's saying, "Oh, we're going to deport all those Latinos and Arabs who voted for Trump or who didn't vote for Democrats." Look, we always know about these liberals. They are all these as soon as all it takes for the mask to drop and the racism to come out is for them to lose the election. Like Malcolm X was spot on about these people. Malcolm X says, yes, there are some white people who fight for progressive cause, but they never labeled themselves as liberals. It's those liberals you have to watch out for because they're the fox. The wolves, you can tell them from miles away. Their wolf poses no threat because you know who they are. But those liberals, they pose them. They're fox. They pose them as your ally, as your friends. But they will backstab you. And this is exactly. I mean, they're trying to blame everyone except for. But if you look at they're trying to blame all the color folks. But if you look at the numbers, white people, white women voted overwhelmingly for Trump, especially in the swing states. You don't see them blaming the white women, right? They're saying, oh. Yeah. Instead, they're saying, "Oh, this is all about misogyny." Well, look at your white sisters. What do you mean misogyny? The women's voice suddenly doesn't matter anymore. All your white sisters voted for Trump. So this is ridiculous. White people more than any other group voted for Trump, and yet they're blaming the Latinos, the Arabs, the black people, the Asians. It's amazing. It's amazing. But I'm glad it happened. So. Now you can see
and it shows you the level of desperation, Carl.
I mean,
I'm sorry. There was a delay. I'm sorry, and it was buffering a little bit.
It's good. It's good. So you have the full mass drop and all the racism come out, and they're blaming on racism. That I agree. America is a deeply racist country. We all know that, including all those liberals who are now blaming everybody. They're all racist. We know this is true. And but right now they if Kamala won, the Democrats is going to pursue their same policy. You have a Pete Buttigieg coming out saying, "Oh, like why we need to vote to defeat Trump so we can get a normal Republican Party." Like, what do you mean by that? Then all the normal Republican Party is called the DNC right now. They openly embrace Dick Cheney, George W. Bush. I mean, they're openly embracing all the neocons, rehabilitating all the people who started the Iraq War, and then this is their goal to win election. I mean, I'm glad it didn't work out. If that had that work out, I would have even more pessimism about America. But yeah, so good, Rick.
Do you believe, Carl? Do you believe that now with this could have? Because one thing, I don't believe anyone gets elected in the United States. I believe that they get selected by the deep state or something like this. And do you believe that because they were catching it in Ukraine so bad, they needed to pivot to the other positions that they wanted? They needed to tackle Iran and then move on to China, because of all China is advancing in every zone, every phase of everything so quickly, and they thought that they had a little bit more time, and now they're realizing Iran, with the display of missiles and technology and radars, that they must now pivot to Iran, and then after that to pivot to China, because they're already losing in Russia. Could that have been one of the reasons they selected Trump, because he is more friendly towards Russia and a little more antagonistic towards Iran and China?
Well, the U.S. elite are not a monolith group. There's many factions of the oligarchs fighting for power. There's definitely one side that of the opinion, especially symbolized by people like Professor Mearsheimer, who want U.S. to wind down Ukraine war, to even disengage from Middle East, to concentrate all the resources to come from China. But we know that's not going to happen, because the U.S. will never give up Middle East. Israel is a golden child that takes priority over everything else. So we're really talking about whether to concentrate, do a 3-front war or 2-front war, right? And because the Middle East is always going to be included in that package. But I don't think fundamentally, I don't think the Trump is going to win the war against the NATO bureaucracy. There's too many jobs at stakes. The U.S. is a fundamentally careers nation. All these elite, it's all about their careers, their job on the line. They will fight tooth and nail to make sure U.S. is deeply engaged in the Ukraine war, even though it's a lost cause already. And Trump, he did capture some of these populist discontent in America. Unlike the DNC just completely ignored all the populist demand from its. They basically neutered. They basically neutered Bernie Sanders right after the 2020 campaign. And now Bernie Sanders is coming out and saying, "Oh, Democrats is not doing the right thing." What were you doing the last 4 years? Last 4 years, you're firmly giving legitimacy to Biden and Kamala, So I'm hoping this electoral defeat will force the Democrats at least try to woo some of its former base by shifting from the right pendulum swing, which had happened since Clinton. The Democrats have been moving to the right ever since the Bill Clinton era, and now they move so right they're on the same side of Dick Cheney, and so hopefully this will force them to rethink their strategy. But I'm not too optimistic, but something got to change. But for a fundamental shift in the U.S. foreign policy, I just don't see that happen. There were times, back in the days when there was fundamental U.S. foreign policy shift, like Nixon visit to China. I just don't see that even with Trump. Sure, Trump did meet with Kim Jong-un, which other president couldn't have pulled off, but nothing came out of it. I mean, he met with Kim Jong-un, and then that's it. It kind of petered out afterwards. There were some tensions because right after his meeting with Kim Jong-un, U.S. military and South Korea manufactured some tensions with the North Korea, so everything is called off again. There's too much institutional stake in the United States to maintain those tensions for any president, including Trump, to change course. I don't think that's gonna happen. And yeah.
I was looking at the Joel Bradford. He says that damn Obama trying to scold so-called black men. How pathetic. Joel, let me tell you, excuse me, the only time Obama speaks to black men is when he's talking down to them. That's the only time. He never has words of encouragement. He never is doing anything for black America. He only sprouts out when he needs to use them to advance a political agenda. That's what he does. And I say this, a lot of the black voters are hypnotized by that. He can walk the walk and talk the talk, speak the lingo, and he's interested in some of he'll play like he's interested in some of the things that they're interested in. That is only so that he can hypnotize you, so that he can have you helping him to push forward a policy that in the end will be not only detrimental to black America, but it'll be detrimental to poor people in general. So every time he speaks, I turn my head, put on earmuffs, and turn the music up loud or something like this. This guy is he's a shield of the state anyhow, the deep state. Nobody
he is deep state. Yeah, Obama is deep state. He's CIA. His mom was CIA.
Grandmother.
His stepdad. I mean, he came from the CIA family and with deep CIA background, and he's basically the Wall Street snake oil salesman to the minority community. It's like you say, he talks the talk. He doesn't walk the walk. He just talks the talk, and then he looks good on stage. And yeah, he's a black face of Wall Street and the military-industrial complex. And this guy is and CIA frontman. So it's also crazy they're blaming the black folks, the black man in particular. When if you look at the numbers, still by and large, the black men still voted for Democrat in the last election. If you look at it, it's still, nobody. Why is nobody calling out all the white folks voting for Trump? Because they're the largest group by far, overwhelming majority voted for Trump. Yet they're always blaming the black people, the Arabs, the Muslims, the Asians, the Latinos. It's beyond ridiculous. It's a farce. I don't believe in the U.S. electoral process anyway. I stopped believing it after 2008. Last time I believed in Obama. I believe in his message for change. Last time. You fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, fool me once, shame on you. You're not gonna fool me twice. I'm sorry. You're not gonna fool me twice.
Yeah, and I think the reason they don't want to talk about the majority of white women and white men voting for Trump is because the Democratic Party, they don't want to do an introspective look. They don't want to deal with the realities of what is going on. So what they do, they compartmentalize, then marginalize, then they become victimized. Then before you know, they stereotype, and then they have to have somebody to blame. But my mom used to always tell me, whenever you're pointing that finger at someone, 3 are pointing right back at you. so that is something as an adult you have to acknowledge.
They're using the same strategy as Obama. They're trying to shame people to support them. They're trying to talking down to folks, shaming them, and now threatening them with deportation to have them vote for them. Are you kidding me? Like you can't. This is 2024, man. That doesn't work as well when now people have alternative media like YouTube, even though YouTube now is more heavily censored. Like last time I was talking with you about assassination of Sinwar and Gaza, YouTube immediately demonetized that video. It's like straight away.
Yeah, they do that. And you know, and speaking on this, when we're looking at the entire situation, do not forget that. Remember what Joe Biden said when he was running for president also? You're not black if you don't vote for me. They talk the Democratic Party. I mean, they talked out. Yeah, I know everybody. I know I'm not the only one that remembers this. But that's the reality of Obama, Biden. That's the reality of the system. They manipulate you. And Trump is like, what I think the reason they allowed him to be selected is because his backers were so pissed off from the last election because they thought he won that they were going to tear this place up if he had lost. And so what they're trying to do is take the bad situation and make the best out of it by allowing him in the office, but limiting him in his reach and his scope because he's not a politician by trade. And that is going to cause a lot of trouble because he thinks outside the box of the normal politician. And I do believe that is one reason why they allowed him into office is because his supporters were huge and they were pissed. I mean, they were pissed from the last election.
That's actually a good point because Trump is more manageable once he's in position in the White House. You know, you have all these people in the deep state trying to manage him to trying to limit what he can do, whereas he's a lot more dangerous in opposition when there's no that kind of institutional limit on what he can do. This is why they try to put him in jail. but he's a lot more dangerous in opposition because he can say whatever. And then there are a lot, like you said, there were a lot of pissed off Trump supporters for the last election, and if he had lost again, this is gonna be for sure. It's gonna be blow up. Could be pretty spectacularly. So you're probably right about that. Trying to kind of limit the fallout, trying to limit the damage by putting in a position where they can put restraint on him, like through all angles.
It's almost like controlled chaos. That's what it is. That's the way when I saw everything, I was like, why are they allowing him to win when he's a threat to some of the institution or to the mainstream thought? And it came to me and said, maybe they are allowing this because there were so many people. They had never seen the Capitol buildings ransacked the way they were ransacked. They had never seen those people up in arms, and they were calling for civil insurrection and civil war. And so the deep state at its weakened point, I'm thinking, how can we make the best out of this situation? If we don't let a legitimate election take place, Trump has already said that he won't accept losing the election if he doesn't think it's fair. And so that means he had over 50% of the population with him. So now you have a nation divided and a nation at war. So why won't we just allow him in office? And then for allowing him in the office, we put our chips around him, our stooges, so that we can do our best to manage as best as possible the chaos, control chaos.
Yeah. That's, so at the end of the day, nothing is going to change, that folks.
Was in my mind. So, and I believe that.
So at the end of the day, nothing is going to change, folks. It's going to be the same deep state in charge. No. Yeah.
But I do believe this, Carl. I do believe this, that now that he is in office, the deep state, like Mesheimer, I believe that they are focused more on China. It's almost like they have this obsession with China and Iran and North Africa, Iran, and China. They have this obsession with it. And so with with Trump in the position, I believe that now they are going to focus on North Africa, Middle East, because they cannot allow North Africa and the Middle East out of America's grips, because that threatens dollar hegemony. That is why they were pre-positioning all of these military assets in the Middle East prior to and during the election, so that when Trump was allowed to come into office, that it would be hard for him to stem this tide of American positioning for war. And also they were already talking about focusing on China, because China has superseded America, as becoming the largest technologically advanced army. Not just land army, but technologically advanced land army. They are the largest navy. And it's not now where the United States can say that, China has a larger navy, but we're technologically superior. No, China has working rail guns on their destroyers, something that the United States had 20 years a head start, and China actually implemented, and the United States gave up on it because they could not do it. And then we have, within a year, China will have the largest air force. And this is why I believe that they are putting Trump, because he is a little bit more focused on China and a little bit more focused on the Middle East, whereas Kamala, even though she's focused on, she had a lot of ties with the Ukraine because of the kickback money with Joe Biden and the rest of them. I think that's these are some of the small, significant differences. What do you say about that, Carl?
Well, I'm sure there's still a faction of the war party that want to have that pivot, and one of the reasons they're never going to leave Middle East is because China now imports a lot of its oil from the Middle East and Africa. So it's harder to start up shit in middle in the East Asia to come from China directly, but they can start shit in Middle East and Africa, where U.S. Navy can still do a lot of damage. And so this is the area that they're not going to leave anytime soon. They're not going to, if anything, they're just going to throw in more asset into those places just to create trouble for China. Alan Greenspan actually said this in his memoir. One of the reasons for U.S. to start Iraq war back in 2003 was to control the flow of oil at the time when they saw China derive most of its import from the Persian Gulf. So they thought by going to occupy Iraq, now United States can decide who gets that oil. And now United States, because the fracking, the U.S. is largely self-sufficient in oil and gas. So they're less impacted if there's disruption in the oil flow from the Gulf. Not the way that China or nation from the East Asia will be impacted. So U.S. can afford to create trouble by increasing the tensions. And so, yeah, it's about whether they're gonna about the pivot, the reset, Russia reset. I'm Trump said that in his first term. That didn't happen. So like he tried, but the deep state only made the relationship worse, forcing him to expel Russian diplomats from the United States. They just shut down Radio Sputnik America. They forced, and after that, they tried to shut down the YouTube channels of these Radio Sputnik journalists who had their own personal YouTube channels. I'm glad that ban was reversed, but they're very they're really coming down to kind of the limit the channels now of information. Because before, during the time of legacy media, it's very easy to control what information the public gets. You only have to control certain corporate media newspapers. But now with there's so many so many channels for information, they are trying to put the restriction on the platforms, on YouTube, on Twitter, Facebook, etc. So I just don't see the pivot, because United States, a lot of people especially U.S. elite. I just saw a recent interview with Jeffrey Sachs. He said the people in Washington, the people in charge in Washington, they're stupid. They're really stupid. I know this because I know them. And I think so. Whatever grand plan they have, whatever grand strategy they have, you can count on their stupidity and incompetence to fuck it up. Just like how they totally screwed up the Iraq war, because the Iraq war was supposed to enhance U.S. power, but that instead that kind of cratered the U.S. reputation around the world, and you bloomed the U.S. deficit, all this military spending, and actually not putting at the same time that afforded China the time to develop. So now people are looking back on Iraq war as a mistake, not because it's a mistake, it got millions of Iraqi killed, but it's a mistake because United States concentrating in Middle East allowed China to develop to become a peer competitor. I mean, this is their mindset. So, but these same people, again, they're pretty dumb. They're pretty stupid. So I am fully counting on their stupidity to fuck up things this time. But beyond stupidity, there's also vested institutional interest. Like there's a whole NATO bureaucracy. They will not let you pivot away from Europe. I'm sorry, and there's no way that's gonna happen. They're gonna use everything in their power to make sure U.S. will be deeply involved in Ukraine. And we'll see. But I think at least hopefully will happen in a way that will not drive us to World War III. Because before the election, there are people talking about handing over missiles, long-range missiles to Ukraine to allow them to head deeper into Moscow. And that's crazy because those missiles will not be operated by Ukrainians. Target selection, satellite intelligence will not be coming from Ukrainian. There will be the U.S. intelligence services selecting target inside Russia, U.S. personnel operating those missiles, launching those missiles from Ukraine and hitting Russia. And that could lead us to a World War III scenario. But, we at that time, we already saw some people in Pentagon deeply uncomfortable with that idea. That's why Biden had to come out and public said, okay, we're gonna put limits on how they're gonna deploy these missiles. We didn't say anything about giving our approval for deep strike into Russia. So I think with Trump in White House, because Trump traditionally rely on the Pentagon, on the people in the military. So they'll probably listen to the Pentagon in this matter. So I think the U.S. involvement in Ukraine will continue, but in more limited way, in a way that will not lead to World War III, which I'm happy with. I think either candidate, if either one had won, U.S. will continue its path of economic decline in the next 4 years. But for me, as a person who has escaped from America, so to speak, sitting in Bali, my primary concern is not so much how U.S. will decline, is whether U.S. will blow up the world during the U.S. decline. I think it was more probable in Kamala Harris administration than Trump, because under Trump administration, I think at least the people in the Pentagon, those guys live by the grift. They live by the kickback from the arms dealers, but they're not interested into actually starting a war because forget about comfortable retirement to a Bahamas if the war actually get kicked off. So I think they will try to limit kind of the how far they will push the confrontation. This is my take.
And if they were allowed to strike deep into Russia, Russia already said that this would constitute a declaration of war against the Russian forces, and Russia would be obliged to use all forces necessary, which means that China would be forced to use its military capabilities, because remember the old doctrine of the United States during the Cold War that said if a nuclear war broke out between the United States and Russia, that the United States would attack China, even if China was a bystander, as to not allow China to benefit and become the power after the destruction of the two major powers. So this would force China's hand. But you also brought up something about Mr. Sachs, and since you say that, I'm going to oblige you. I'm going to play a clip from Sachs. Okay. Here we are.
NATO expressed the neoconservative ideas in its declaration in the 2024 summit in Washington. I find the declaration to be provocative, dangerous for the world, or I should say it's the neoconservative idea that has been dominating U.S. foreign policy for the past 30 years. And NATO is an instrument of U.S. hegemony. So NATO looks at countries that are powerful and that don't want the U.S. to run the world as adversaries or even enemies. And in this regard, Russia and China are viewed as adversaries or enemies because Russia and China are advocating a multipolar world, not a U.S.-led world. NATO should have nothing to do with East Asia. And the fact that NATO is expanding its mission in East Asia is a reflection that the original purpose of NATO, which was a defensive purpose against a potential Soviet invasion of Western Europe, has been subverted by the U.S. neoconservatives to make NATO serve the purpose of U.S. hegemony. I consider it a delusional policy. The U.S. cannot dominate in Asia. China is powerful, China has its security interests, and the U.S. has no business aiming for primacy or hegemony in Asia. The whole idea is very, very dangerous. I do not think that Japan will officially become a member of NATO. Japan is not in the North Atlantic. It's not in Europe. It's not even arguably a member of NATO. But NATO is talking about opening offices or interconnections with the Japanese military, the Korean military, and so forth. If Japan has good sense, if Korea has good sense, and if China's diplomacy is successful, the countries of East Asia will recognize that the United States should not divide them, should not try to make a Cold War in Asia. The United States wants a division. The war is not between Russia and Ukraine. The war is between Russia and the United States. It happens to be taking place on Ukrainian soil. The United States unilaterally abandoned the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002 and began to place missile systems in Poland and Romania, very close to Russia's borders. It's one of the reasons why this war is so dangerous. These are the two biggest nuclear superpowers. They each have 6,000 nuclear warheads. And it's a bit of a puzzle why the Europeans are so silent. As I said, in part because they're part of a US-led political machine. They also feel the U.S. is their only nuclear umbrella, so-called. In other words, a nuclear deterrent, because these are not nuclear powers in general. But I think that they miss the main point, which is that a more cooperative, much less aggressive NATO policy would make the European countries far more secure and would make Ukraine secure. Because this US-led hegemonic approach, in other words, trying to dominate, is only creating bigger and bigger risks in Europe itself. The problem is that we are talking about two nuclear superpowers, both of which are determined to, quote, win, rather than to settle this war at the negotiating table. And so there's the ever-present risk that this war will escalate into complete nuclear disaster. We have never been closer to nuclear war than we are today. There's a Confucian idea called shu, reciprocity, and that is what we need. The United States should not do unto Russia and China as they would not want Russia and China to do unto them, just as the United States would not like China or Russia to have a military base or missiles in Mexico along the border with the U.S. The U.S. should understand it should not put its missiles and military bases along the border of Russia and China. Confucius would understand this very well. This is just the golden rule. And if we could get behavior that way, the world would be far safer than it is today.
Mr. Sachs, he is talking with a little reasoning after being a part of the so-called Cold War. But Mr. Mearsheimer has a different take on it. Mr. Mearsheimer, he tries to hide imperialistic thought by saying that we should not be fighting in Ukraine. And this is an article that came out. As we were listening to that, I just put in some keywords. Mearsheimer thinks we should focus on China instead of Russia. And an article is titled, "Why One Political Scientist Says the U.S. Should Focus on China Instead of Russia's War in Ukraine." And I'll just read the first part of that. And he says, John Mearsheimer, professor of political science at the University of Chicago, believes the priority of the U.S. in Ukraine should be de-escalation. And people say, whoa, yeah. But it's a reason for that, he says, and that it should shift its focus to China, which he calls the bigger threat. Now, I've listened to a lot of Mearsheimer's talks, and he talks as if China is trying to be this hegemonic power, and that China is trying to dominate. And he never condemns America for what we know being a hegemonic power and trying to dominate and dominating for decades. But because it's China, even though he has nothing to substantiate that part that China is trying to dominate or usurp America's authority, because China is a big power and not beholden to the West. He wants confrontation with China or containment of China. These are two of the things that either to contain China or be forced to confront China. That's confrontation or containment. Why is it that political scientists like that has the ear of everybody and that has influence, are not challenged on those positions and say, hey, let's just say for a minute China wants to be the hegemonic power, and you say there's something wrong with that. Well, why isn't there something wrong with the United States being the hegemonic power? Why isn't it wrong with the United States being the dominant power in Asia? And she does not even reside in Asia. Why is that so hard to comprehend, Carl? And why won't anybody question that?
Well, I think John Mearsheimer is someone who understands U.S. and the U.S. empire very well as an insider. But that's why he assumed everyone else think just like United States. There's a lot of projection when he comes to talk about China, how China is just going to act exactly like United States. The underlying assumption is that U.S. empire is normal. This is the norm. This is what everybody would do if they're in our position. No, that's not the case. U.S. is quite unprecedented in the world history as a kind of the global hegemon and building a global empire. And there's no other country that has kind of has its national foundation built on genocide and slavery, like the way United States was. It's ridiculous to project the unique circumstances of U.S. mentality, which has always been very cutthroat and zero-sum, on a nation like China, which existed for thousands of years. It's so So when Mearsheimer talks about United States, I listen. When he talks about U.S. empire, I listen. When he starts talking about what China would do, I just like I just turn it off because I don't need to go to Mearsheimer to understand China. And the problem is with this kind of thinking is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think China is an enemy and you treat China as an enemy, China will start see you as a potential threat. I mean, this is common sense. When you ring China with missiles and your vassal states and U.S. military bases, China is going to build up its own military response, like what happened in the last 20 years. It's a reciprocality, like a lot of the American elite that don't understand it's a two-way street. They think, okay, it's just U.S. that's going to hit other people, Russia, China, or Iran. They don't think, yeah, they could actually hit you back. Last time this happened, when U.S. put nuclear tipped missiles in Turkey against Soviet Union, Khrushchev put missiles on Cuba. This happened during the JFK era, and at that time, U.S. almost blew up the world. U.S. threatened a nuclear war to get the Soviets to back down, to take the missiles out of Cuba. Yeah, right now, U.S. is putting missiles in the Philippines. They're selling missiles to Taiwan. They're placing that system in South Korea, all around the periphery of China. And this is underlying assumption is that if we're going to go to war with China, the war is going to happen in China's front yard. It's going to, it's going to be the bombs and missiles going to hit Chinese coast. The assumption is that China will not hit back. This is launched that ICBM test recently towards South Pacific, United States. We have some delivery capability, we're also a nuclear power and we have means to deliver it. And this is another reason for U.S. to deploy tactical. They're talking about deploying tactical nukes to East Asia. It's also because they realize the rising Chinese military power means it will be increasingly difficult for U.S. to defeat China in its front yard in a conventional war. That's why they're like, okay, well, nuke is going to tip the balance for us. Well, I mean, you can't just go a little bit nuke. Right? I'm sorry. It's like you can't just be a little bit. It's like my friend joke. You can't just be a little bit gay. You can't be. You can't just go a little bit nuclear war. Once you go nuke, it's full out. It's gonna be full out nuclear exchange, Armageddon. Okay, I'm sorry. That's how nuclear deterrence and mutually assured destruction happen. That's the mad theory. But the problem is a lot of the U.S. elite right now, I don't think they believe the mad theory anymore. Somehow they feels like, oh, it's just gonna be U.S. that's gonna do delivering the herd. They don't think the other. This is why you have these talks about giving Ukraine missiles that can strike deep into Russia. They don't think like the Russia and China is not gonna hit back, and they just don't think the U.S. homeland could be hit back. This is very dangerous thinking. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens with the Trump in office in a couple of months, because I predict there's going to be a lot of pandemonium. There's a lot of chaos, a lot of panic before the dust settle, and then we can gain a true clear picture of how Trump foreign policy is going to shape out. So I'm going to. I'm happy that Kamala campaign got defeated, because if that had happened, it's just going to be the same old, and we know how that turned out. It's going to be increasing confrontation in all three fronts of the war. Whether the pit, another deceit, another conceit of U.S. elite when they talk about how U.S. is going to handle Russia and China is because they think by just offering olive branch to Russia right now at this point, and certainly they will be able to turn Russia against China. Like they think they can do like a reverse Kissinger, like how Nixon, during Nixon visit China and pull China into the anti-Soviet camp. But the thinking, the problem again is like, it's a narcissistic thinking. Nixon did not turn China against Soviet Union. Sino-Soviet split actually happened, created the condition for Nixon to visit China, not the vice versa. Kissinger didn't manage to turn China against Soviet Union. So China and Soviet Union were already fighting border wars before Nixon ever visited. So right now, that condition do not exist. They can't just somehow like magically switch Russia against China, because Russian leaders are not stupid. Like unlike Washington elite, unlike American leaders, Putin is not stupid. And after what they have just done to Russia, they're not going to suddenly say, "Oh, okay, well, let's all be friends. Let's all go fight China." I mean, this is wishful thinking. This is wishful thinking, and that derived from kind of the very the narcissistic U.S. hegemonic mindset. They think they can control the world event just like that, snap of their finger. That's not going to happen.
As you were talking, especially when you were talking about you can't be just a little gay, you're going to be all the way gay, and it can't be a little miniature nuclear war. It's going to be all the way. And that reminded me of during the term of Xi Jinping when he was the president of China, and they were asking him about all of the threats that the United States were throwing at China back then about defending Taiwan and all of this. And he was so calm and so humble. And he said, I don't think that they would be prepared to trade California for Taiwan. Meaning that if it was going to be a nuclear war, then it would not just be in Asia against China. It would reach the US's border. I remember that vividly. And it stunned the reporter that was asking the questions and stuff. And now we see that China is leaps and bounds ahead of where they were under Xi Jinping. I want to play something for you. It's a bit long, I would say, for a clip. But I want to play this, and this has something. It came out about a year ago. But it's pertinent to right now. And this guy is being asked questions on Global, I think this is Global Times. And he is answering them in like two different segments. And I just want you to listen to this and on the backside of this, come back and tell me your thoughts on this. All right.
But does that mean that people in the US actually are willing to go to war with China? That's a whole different question. But I also think that if the war were to actually come to fruition, that a lot of people would say, regardless of what we think about China, we're not willing to send our children, our brothers and sisters, to go fight a war against China, to go risk their lives, to be killed. The US is a hypocritical society, if that was the one word, hypocrisy. That it's a government it's a society that's presented itself as the exceptional nation, the nation above all other nations. And yet, internally, inside the US, everything they accuse everyone else of, they practice at home. And sometimes to even greater degree. There's 856 people were killed by the police in the United States last year. 856, at least that was in mid-December when I looked at the numbers. It's probably higher by the year's end. And yet, the US lectures the world about state violence and human rights. It's as if the US is not a human rights violator. So, and that's just one example. You could take almost any category, and when you start to scrutinize it, you find hypocrisy. The US obscures its own history of modernization, in fact. People just think the US arrived as a modern society or something. The US is founded by slaveholders, drug dealers. They were selling tobacco and sugar. People were stealing the land. And the fact that they had this huge territory where they basically expelled everyone, committed genocide, had this property for free, that had all this land. It allowed the US, it had certain advantages in terms of its modernization process, but even still, when it industrialized, it used massive amounts of child labor, massive amounts of immigrant labor, people who were worked to death. Every major infrastructure project in the 1800s and early 1900s in the United States, the bridges, the canals, the tunnels, they had huge amounts of suffering attached to them. This was the human cost of so-called modernization. And there was such enormous inequality that was generated at that time from inside the US, and then also basically colonialism, neo-colonialism, slavery. These are the sort of the preconditions for US modernization. But, the fact that China has basically done it in a few short decades compared to the length of time that the West modernized, and done it with, I would say, far less human suffering, and without basically extracting lots of value from the rest of the world, without colonialism, is an amazing achievement. And frankly, I think the one thing that gets underestimated about Chinese modernization is the role of the Communist Party of China. The fact that you actually have a government that can set 5, 10, 15-year plans, can set goals that are 30, 50 years out, and then assess the political leadership at every level based on whether it's achieving those goals, is very different from the US political system, where a politician comes in, they have no interest in an infrastructure project that's going to be finished in 20 years or 10 years. They have no interest in a poverty alleviation program that's not going to deliver immediate results. Why? Because their election is coming up in 2 years or 4 years. It's so competitive, so individualistic, focused really around short-term thinking. That's the reason why all the bridges are collapsing in the United States, why there's so many train derailments. I think that with the magnitude of the challenges, whether it's climate change, technology, unemployment, all these different things, this is the moment in history where long-term planning is going to be heavily rewarded. I don't think a war between the US and China is totally inevitable. I think it is avoidable, but it's not avoidable unless there's a change in the form of government, basically, in the United States. I think both parties have a consensus right now that while they can disagree on almost any other issue, that if China is allowed to grow peacefully for the foreseeable future, that means the US will lose its place as the top dog in the whole world. And both parties are united that this is completely an unacceptable outcome. It's true that people in the US now have a more negative view of China than they did a few years ago because of the nonstop propaganda. People's perceptions of China can change a lot based on this propaganda. But does that mean that people in the US actually are willing to go to war with China? That's a whole different question. But I also think that if the war were to actually come to fruition, that a lot of people would say, regardless of what we think about China, we're not willing to send our children, our brothers and sisters, to go fight a war against China, to go risk their lives, to be killed. I think at that point, there would basically be a pre-revolutionary situation in the United States. And so that's why I think the US knows this, and they're trying to, instead of have actual war with China, what they're trying to do is increase the pressure on China, to encircle China, to use information war, hybrid war, financial war, to try to stimulate more contradictions inside of China. Once you start to let people know, well, actually the people in China, for whatever criticisms and problems they have and whatever debates there are, and of course there's lots of debates here, they support the government, they have trust in a lot of their institutions, higher levels of trust than we have in the West. That whole narrative of basically the US as the white knight, the humanitarian savior, it starts to fall apart. But I think as China emerges more and more in the world, it will become a reference point for many other countries that have a similar history of colonialism, especially how to overcome colonialism. So my hope is that China again can become a reference point for an alternative model. In Latin America and Africa, people are tired of a financial system where they become deeply indebted, where they are basically made to produce only one crop or one natural resource. They have no strategic leverage or advantage in the global trading system. And China represents an alternative. China represents usually better terms when it comes to loans, better trade agreements, less strings attached, more political autonomy where China doesn't try to, pick and choose who's going to lead the different governments of the global south. So if you're a government in Africa or Latin America, that's going to become very attractive after you've been dealing with the IMF for decades. It's not like any one country is perfect. But the whole narrative of neo-colonialism, that is an invention that is being designed to preserve Western hegemony in Africa. They see the writing on the wall. They see what is the global population going to look like in 50 years? It's going to be overwhelmingly Asian and African. And so how does the West maintain its domination if that's the case? The only way it can maintain its domination is if it gets the vast majority of people in Africa to distrust the people in Asia, and vice versa. So they have an interest in building now a narrative that splits up any kind of unity, strategic unity between Asia and Africa. I think this is, to them, the greatest threat they're facing.
So, Carl, what do you have to say over this? Before you answer, I want the people to understand that there's almost 1.5 billion people in China. There's almost 1.5 billion people in India. There's 1.5 billion people on the continent of Africa. There's hundreds of millions of the Pan-African diaspora all across the Western Hemisphere. And the guy says that they don't want the dynamics to change, even though it's going to be overwhelmingly African and Asian in the future. What do you have to say about the policies? Because to me, Carl, if I know that I've done something wrong, and I know that I continue to do something wrong, and I see that if I continue to do this later on down the line, it will not benefit me. It will be to a detriment. The first thing I would do is say, hey, let me talk to the Chinese. Let me talk to the Africans. Let me talk to the people that I antagonized, that I exploited, that I did something to, and not just talk to them, but show true contrition of heart and try to make amends, because there's going to come a time when it's flipped and I won't have the power to say. So maybe if I show that I'm sorry, when the power dynamics change, they won't be looking for revenge. And maybe my fall won't be as hard and as far. What do you have to say about that?
See, Rashid, that's why you are not the president of the United States. It takes a special breed of people who rise to the top in the U.S. political system. It takes a special breed of people who are so self-interested, so self-centered, and short-term thinking, and it's only those people get to bubble up to the top of the system, and this is why U.S. is in the situation it is in right now. But about the video, I agree with almost everything he said, except John Mearsheimer actually had an opposite opinion. He thinks if the war does break out between U.S. and China, he thinks because the U.S. state propaganda is so powerful, you will be able to convince its public to go along with U.S. plan for war, even if it goes against the interest of the public. Which I have some kind of sympathy for John Mearsheimer's point of view, because that's what we have observed in the past. That's what happened with the Iraq War, etc. But the difference is scale, right? Iraq War, U.S. did that with a volunteer force. There was no draft. One of the biggest opposition to Vietnam War is a draft. People did not want to be drafted to go die in the Southeast Asian jungles, and there's no way U.S. can fight what they think a limited war with China with the current force level they have. John Mearsheimer believed they could. John Mearsheimer believes that with U.S. current military posture in East Asia, with the involvement of the allies, Japan, Korea, Australia, Philippines, etc., they're able to, start the conflict and hold the line until United States can fully mobilize and fully propagandize its public to go to war. I don't think it will come to that. John Mearsheimer also said, he thinks the actual possibility of war is quite small in Taiwan Strait. So I agree with what the presenter in the video said. What the U.S. will do is they wage the hybrid war, which is informational war. All these negative propaganda against China is part of it. It's to convince the public that what U.S. Don't question the U.S. policy toward China. This is why we cannot make up with China, because China is evil and we are righteous. And the economic war. We have the chip sanction against China. We have all kind of and we're going to place high tariffs on Chinese product. This is right now. U.S. is not at a full kinetic hot war with China. U.S. is already waging an economic war against China. That has happened since 2018, since the first term Trump presidency. It will likely continue into the second term Trump presidency, because U.S. believe it could weaken China through this combination of hybrid war, of informational warfare and economic warfare. But I don't think it's going to work. I think it's already backfiring right now by cutting off revenue from the U.S. and Western countries complying with the U.S. sanctions on China. Intel just laid off a lot of its workers because Intel right now, they can't sell to China, one of the largest markets. Intel is the first. It's going to also happen to ASML, the Dutch company that makes the USB machines, that makes the most advanced chip, not allowed to sell to China. It's going to happen across a huge section of the U.S. tech industry when they're cut off from one of the world's largest markets. And once they lose that market, once China are able to indigenize the production of the semiconductors, those markets are not coming back, because the Chinese companies are no longer going to source their supply chain overseas when they know that supply chain is unreliable and is liable to be cut off by U.S. policy anytime. They would rather go buy domestic if they have the chance. So that means once these Western companies that participate in U.S. sanctions lose the Chinese market, they're going to lose the Chinese market forever.
Yep.
And the fact that people don't realize, yes, the war is going to be Asian and African. Chinese trade with United States is only 3% of the GDP. People in U.S. think, U.S. is so indispensable nation. If we just cut off trade with China, Chinese economy is going to collapse. No. You cut off China, that means you're not going to get goods in your supermarket. China will be fine. Or maybe they will shave off 3% of their GDP, but that's not the end of the world. But you're not going to get toilet paper, from Walmart. And so it's crazy talk. It's crazy talk. I don't think I don't think that China's rise will be stopped at this point by these economic sanctions. China's rise has already been baked in. Investor Jim Rogers said a long time ago, he said Jim Rogers said this 2000, the secular rise of China is baked in. Nothing can stop it without a nuclear Armageddon. Right? So I don't think, nuclear Armageddon, we're all screwed, but I don't think we're going to come to that. So I think China will continue to rise despite all the obstructions putting in by U.S. Who only end up boomerang to hurt U.S. and the Western economy before.
And Carl, check your mic. Your mic was going up and down. Check your volume. Okay, there we are. There we are. But I want to also play this for you too, and I definitely want to get your feedback off of this here. This is about a minute and 11 seconds, something like that.
I do believe that the major problem that we are tackling now is in relation to the dollar as being the main currency used in the world. So dollar has become a weapon, and it's been used against many countries, and so it's undermining the safety of the international financial system. So this is one thing that the BRICS might think of, and this is one thing that maybe the BRICS Bank, the New Development Bank, can be involved in the future with technical studies to see the availability of alternatives to dollar. I guess it has a relation to the polarizing situation that we're living in the world. So the crisis in Ukraine and all the support that the NATO and the Western Alliance is giving to Ukraine against Russia, all the sanctions against Russia, sanctions against Iran, sanctions against China, and all this new war against China in terms of technologies and in terms of economic issues. I guess that this has accelerated this process of many countries from the global south to look for alternatives to this order. So that's what I think.
So what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. That the U.S. is not the indispensable nation. People are perfectly happy to trade with each other. They're happy to trade with the United States. I think all the nations in the world are happy to trade with U.S. given the chance. But if U.S. were really to cut off the trade, that will not be the end of the world. Countries will continue to trade with each other. Everything is made in China anyway. They can just buy stuff from China. and Chinese right now, the number one trading partner with China is not United States, it's ASEAN. Yep. China has larger trade with Southeast Asia than they have with United States, and that will continue. The trend is going to continue. Well, what part of that though is because the U.S. restriction on China trade, so a portion of the China trade to U.S. get diverted through Southeast Asia. So the Chinese factories in Vietnam are now producing for United States, and Chinese factories in Mexico are producing for United States, and so that is part of that. But the overall trend is China will continue a regional integration with Southeast Asia. They will build more trade links with Africa, and the trade volume will continue to rise, especially with China now producing. They're not only just producing like basic goods anymore. They're also moving into high value products like EVs, cell phones, etc. So what. Even Apple phone, even iPhone is produced in China, right? Like they try to shift the supply chain to India, but then it was such a disaster with iPhone 15. So they now, for iPhone 16, they're shifting back their production back in China again. So the decoupling is not going to work because the Chinese ecosystem infrastructure has been built up that it's such a way that it's not just the labor cost anymore. The Chinese working wage has been steadily rising in the last 30 years. Now the Chinese wage is higher than many countries in this neighborhood. Yet those industries still stay in China because there's still higher efficiency in the Chinese factories when they are now moving into automations. A lot of the Chinese EVs are made in factory that's fully automated. You can't really it's US that's falling behind. Like Audi is, for example, they are producing for China only EV. I'm like, okay, why is it for China only, right? Like then I realized it has to be for China only because Audis, they make those EVs in their factories in China. If they were to try to export to EU or United States, they get slapped with 300% tariffs. So all the Chinese consumers now they're getting the latest tech products, latest tech gadgets. It's the U.S. and the Western Europe. They're increasingly falling behind. People, by the way, don't realize this. A lot of the people in United States and Europe, they still have a concept of China that's like stuck in like 1960s or even like 19th century. So a lot of tourists that travel to China are quite shocked to find that China is quite modern, because that's not what their newspaper, what their medias are telling them. And but increasingly, with China have a visa-free policy to almost all Western European nations right now, a lot of the travelers to China discover, in fact, China are leaving them behind. Like I just saw a YouTube video of British tourists. They're like, yeah. Well, I just realized how far behind we're behind China in terms of public infrastructure, in terms of high-speed trains, and it's in terms of mobile payment. People don't realize this because the United States is the most propagandized nation in the world. We are being force-fed with corporate media propaganda that do not give us a true picture of the world. And so to counter that, I always encourage people to travel, to go outside the borders, and then you kind of really broaden your horizons. When I came to Southeast Asia in 2019, that's the moment I realized the Asian country is already here. It's not the future. It's here already. The Asian country is already here. I see like infrastructure sprouting up everywhere, not just in China, but all Chinese neighborhood, in Malaysia, even in Indonesia. Like, people in the US are just not aware of it. They're not even aware of this development. And I fully agree. The future will be Asian and African.
And I was looking at a video earlier, speaking on videos. This was a few days ago. I was stunned. I'm going to tell you, I was stunned. I saw the EVs in China, and the stuff that they were stacked with, and how much mileage they got, and how, I mean, it's like, it's unbelievable. And you would say, well, shouldn't Elon be doing that? But these EVs in China like leaves Elon EVs in the dust, even though he manufactures a lot there. But I want to go back and say something. You were talking about the biggest trade partner to China, which is ASEAN. I tell a lot of people that on the show, because most people are not aware of that. And here is the thing that most people should be aware about that trade. Most of that trade is done in yuan. That is a threat to the dollar. That is why the United States is over in Asia trying to divide those nations. I just you can Google, what were the words? ASEAN China trade in yuan. And it comes up, it says, in the first 8 months of 2024, trade between China and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations was 4.5 trillion yuan. That's $633 billion. That is crazy. That is absolutely crazy. The volume of yuan that is being moved through the trade. Do you think that is one of the reasons that Mearsheimer is really trying to put focus on the Asia Pacific region?
Absolutely. I mean, Mearsheimer said, Asia Pacific is going to be the most important region in terms of economic development in the 21st century. This is why we shouldn't even bother with Europe or Middle East. That's not where the future is. Asia is where the future is. This is the area why United States need to dominate. That's why they need to confront and contain China. That's the whole underlying reason for Mearsheimer's strategy for United States. But as you said, the East Asia is already integrating with the Chinese economy. A lot of the trade with Asia consists of machine parts, different components exported from China to this region to be assembled, to be put together. There's no reason for the trade to be conducted in dollars. I mean, they're buying and selling from China and to China. And there's another reason, give it to the lie of the so-called freedom of navigation in South China Sea, because U.S. says, South China Sea is the most important sea lane in the world trade. Trillions of traffic, $1 trillion of trade going through. Well, yeah, the 80%, more than 80% of the trade going through South China Sea is to and from China. Of course, it's one of the most important sea lanes in the world, but they don't need U.S. Navy to protect it because China is perfectly happy to see that trade remain secure because that's China's lifeline. But that's not the message we're getting in the United States. People in U.S. really think U.S. Navy is in South China Sea to protect the world trade. No, it's not. U.S. Navy is there to show China like we can screw your lifeline. We can mess with your vital trade spy route. That its whole purpose. It's the purpose is never to safeguard the trade. China never said they're gonna cut off the trade in South China Sea because that trade is to and from China itself. And so yeah, but this is a trend. This is the trend. I think it's almost irreversible at this point. The economic pull of China is just too great right now. Chinese investment in all of Southeast Asia dwarfs United States, with only exception of the Philippines, because the Philippines say they have voluntarily cut off all the trade links with China. So now, like they get more investment from I don't know the U.S. U.S. Military investment, building up bases or something. But the rest of the Southeast Asia, they're fully moving on ahead with the Asian century without United States.
And Carl, that when I read that this little synopsis of the volume, the trade volume between China and ASEAN, it brought something to mind that pushed me right back to North Africa and West Asia, or what they call the Middle East or whatever. And I noticed that when she was overthrowing those nations, and she had 7 nations that she wanted to take out in 5 years, according to Wesley Clark and all of that, I noticed that some of those nations were key trading partners, whether they bought weapons from Russia or whether they did trade with Russia. But I noticed the influx of terror right now in the Middle East or West Asia and North Africa is benefiting NATO nations because they're trying to stop that Belt and Road program that China has, and so all of the nations that are signing up, they're being flooded with terrorists, and the United States is surrounding them with drone bases and destabilizing the nations. And now we look at Iran, a new member of BRICS. I think that they're trying to get into Russia and China's underbelly, and they're using Israel to do it, to attack Iran. They've already subjugated Iraq a little bit, but Iran is what they want because they believe that now if they get Iran, they'll have China and Russia surrounded, and they'll be able to control not only in their minds, the waterways in the South China Sea, the Malacca Strait, all the way around the Indian Ocean into the Arabian Gulf, Arabian Sea, and all of that stuff. I believe that they have it in their minds that they can control that, and then they destabilize the land routes, which makes the Silk Road, in their eyes, unviable. What say you about that matter? Because this stuff is too connected for this not to be that way.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's a U.S. strategy. That's why, I mean, U.S. has a hate boner for Iran ever since 1979 Islamic Revolution that overthrew the U.S. proxy, the Shah. Iran was one of the linchpin of U.S. strategy in the Middle East, other than Israel, and suddenly losing out on Iran, which had enormous oil and gas deposit that was owned by BP, British Petroleum. Yep. Britain also had a huge role in Iran politics before that because of the role of British Petroleum. But later, they brought in the American oil interest in. So it was a big loss from the U.S. point of view, the loss of Iran, and they never forgave Iranians for that. And now they always try to push for regime change for Iran. But again, Iran does not stand alone now. As you see, when when United States tried to, was doing the proxy war in Ukraine against Russia, Iran supplied Russia with drone technology and cooperation. And if U.S. now should go after Iran, Iran is for sure is going to get support from Russia, from China, and there's not much United States can do about it because Iran actually borders Russia through Caspian Sea. I mean, unless U.S. Navy figure out a way to zap their navy somehow magically airdrop into Caspian Sea, there's nothing they can do to stop that supply line of Russian support for Iran. And similarly, China's trade with Iran continues through the Iron Silk Road. Right now, there's already rail links from China's northwest go through the Central Asia to Iran, or they can just go through Russia and then go through the Caspian Sea. So these many supply line is outside of reach of United States, particularly after U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. One of the geostrategic reason for U.S. presence in Afghanistan was also to have like a thorn in the underbelly of Central Asia. That there was one point in time U.S. had military base not only in Afghanistan but also in the neighboring Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan.
And Pakistan.
They got kicked out of Uzbekistan because U.S. tried to foment a color revolution in that country by sponsoring Islamicists against its government. U.S. subsequently got kicked out of Kyrgyzstan, and because and then U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan. So China now is shipping goods to Afghanistan through Central Asia. Afghan produced are now being sold in China via the Iron Silk Road. And so this is another instance of U.S. bombs China builds. China is offering trade opportunities, but what U.S. right now the best they can do is war and weapons. This is why they're very dead set against Belt and Road Initiative. They tried everything to smear the Belt and Road Initiative as some kind of debt trap. Which another 100% projection there, because debt trap is what World Bank and IMF do all the time, and what China does is offers this country an alternative, which U.S. and Europe find unacceptable. So I don't see these trends as reversible at this point, because what China offers is far more attractive than what U.S. and the Europeans could offer. Well, Europeans have their own problem to worry about this point. Back in 2001, when I worked about 6 months in Germany. Back then, the Euro economy is, people now will be shocked. Back then, the EU economy was bigger than U.S. economy. Yep. There was a time when EU had the similar living standard as United States. Today US is there, Europe is here. And this is all because the European elite who have subjugated their own people's interest to the Washington's interest. And this is only going to build up the popular discontent. This is why we're seeing like a wave of like the right-wing party coming to power in Europe. In a way, it's because when the economy goes bad, people either go left or they go right, and that's how fascism came to power in Germany in the 1920s, 1930s, because when the people are becoming increasingly disillusioned by the economic reality. And Europe is reaching that point again, especially when their leadership is so far removed from the average Europeans. They are just basically spokesmen and spokeswomen of Washington, like von der Leyen, like Baerbock, all these people being groomed from early on in the Atlantis institution to be Washington's proxy and spokesperson in Europe. And so Europe is going to be screwed. I mean, they already screwed from being cutting off on the cheap Russian gas, and now they're voting to slap tariffs on Chinese goods. You know, one of their biggest market for German manufacturers. So this is all done at Washington's behest. So Europe is screwed, and this is part of the Washington strategy, by the way. By screwing Europe, they're forcing the German industrialists to take the German factories to move them to United States. This whole plan of destabilizing the world, including their own allies. United States is not above cannibalizing its own allies to keep its own economy going. So we're going to see more of that. But with Trump at helm, it's going to be more overt. Because with Biden is going to at least put on a pretense of we're all friends, we're partners. Trump will just be like, okay, pay up for your NATO dues. Pay up for your role to support the U.S. empire. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
And since we're on this subject, let me play this clip also about what is Yanis Varoufakis. He used to be a Greek finance minister. He ran for prime minister of Greece, and this is what he has to say. I'll bring it up. This will not be a clip. This will be an upload from the computer, so it'll be a little different because I'm bringing it from another platform. So I want you to listen to this. All right, let's go here.
Not in favor of the working class, but they think in Marxist terms. They understand that capitalism produces underconsumption, and American capitalism is constantly running the risk of not having enough aggregate demand for its products.
This very idea, EU as a design of the United States, is not very well known in China. For instance, I'm thinking of this with the rise of Euro for a time, and many people thought it's the Europeans' identity to show we're different from the United States. We need to have economic autonomy. And some people even say that the very breakout of the war, Kosovo War, was in one way or another the U.S. attempt to destroy the euro. And another thing is the very cause of this war against Iraq, Saddam Hussein, had to do with Saddam Hussein's decision to use euro to sell its oil. So do you think this is a fair assessment, or it's completely wrong from your point of view as the EU's relations with the United States, more boss and the vassal state, this kind of structure? Yeah.
It's an interesting hypothesis. I believe it's more complicated than that. And allow me to explain why is it more complicated. Look, the Americans didn't want to destroy the euro. The Americans were skeptical about the euro. They were saying to Europeans, what are you doing? You want to federate? Federate. But don't federate your money. Because the Americans are, whatever you may say about them, at least they are smart. And they are more practically minded. And they think globally. Germans do not think globally. They were at the time, you see, the German mindset, you have to understand, I appreciate it. They just didn't want to be a global power again because of the trauma of the defeat of Nazi Germany. They wanted one thing. And I think Chinese people understand that. They wanted to be the workshop of Europe. They wanted to make good washing machines and great propellers for your ships here in the shipyards. They wanted to make electronics. They wanted to make pharmaceuticals. They wanted to build things and make money out of that without dominating Europe or the world. That's not a bad thing. The problem is that this means you don't have an understanding of the macroeconomic conditions under which you can do it. You have to, under capitalism, you need to worry about where the demand will come. Because the problem that capitalism has, as Marxism has taught us, is that it produces under-consumption. Now, from 1945, or at least 1949, 1950, all the way to the mid-1970s and beyond, the United States created the conditions for German cars and German pharmaceuticals and German chemicals to have markets. The Germans didn't have to think about it. The Americans were managing global aggregate demand. At some point, especially after 2008, that was no longer the case. And the Germans continued not to care about managing the macroeconomy. They thought that somehow, if they produce good things, good manufactured goods, they will sell magically on the basis of how desirable they are. That's simply not understanding how capitalism works. So the Americans were looking at the euro thinking, this is going to be a problem for you folks. Think about it carefully. I have spoken to, for instance, an interesting conversation I had with Jack Lew, L-E-W. Jack Lew was the finance minister, the US Treasury Secretary of Barack Obama. He was very, very angry with Europeans, not because they had the euro, but for the same reasons I was angry with Europeans, because they were practicing austerity for the many while printing money for the many. Now, I was, from a left-wing perspective, angry with what Europe was doing. He was from an American perspective, because he understands that a Europe which was imposing austerity on the German working class, essentially is pushing American industry to boost its net exports to the United States, and therefore to export unemployment to the United States. So the American government was very angry with the European Union. One reason for the Ukraine war, one reason for essentially turning against Europe by Washington, D.C., was that the Americans wanted to teach the Europeans, and particularly the Germans, a lesson. You cannot continue to export unemployment to the United States, but just because you're not doing the right thing by your own people. And now they have won, because now the German government is completely in a state of panic. You mentioned Saddam Hussein. Let me say something about that. I don't believe that the United States invaded Iraq in the first Gulf War because of anything to do with currencies. What happened was, remember, it was 1991. As I was saying before, the difference between the United States authorities and the European authorities is the United States authorities are good Marxists, not in favor of the working class, but they think in Marxist terms. They understand that capitalism produces underconsumption, and American capitalism is constantly running the risk of not having enough aggregate demand for its products, right? So it's essentially Das Kapital turned upside down. How to use Das Kapital against the working classes of the world. But still, it's a Marxist way of thinking about it. So in 1991, the Cold War ended. If you look at the national accounts of the United States up until 1990, 1989, 1990, the military-industrial complex of the United States, and in particular, the industry that produces ammunition, cruise missiles, Pershing missiles, were accounting for up to 8% of GDP. 8% of national income was accounted for by the production of these weapons. Now, you've got to understand, and I'm sure you do, that Congress, the establishment, is not united. There are some senators that represent the armaments industry, the military-industrial complex. There are other senators who represent the medical establishment, the insurance companies, medical insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies. Now, they didn't want the money to be spent on missiles. They wanted it to be spent on them. Whenever the Pentagon brought to the Senate or to the House a bill saying we need 100 billion more, 200 billion more, 1 trillion more, they were senators who were saying no because they were representing other interests. So it's not a unified thing. While the Cold War lasted, nobody dared in the Senate speak out against the Pentagon budget. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, they did. They said, hang on a second, we no longer have an enemy. Why do we need more missiles? Why do we need more ammunition? So this is my speculative theory, that in 1991, remember there was a major recession in 1991 in America. There is a very strong causal link between the reduction in expenditure on armaments with that recession. And they needed to start spending again. Now, of course, their warehouses were full of ammunition. How do you go to the Senate and say, we need more ammunition when you've got so much? You need to spend it. So they invaded Iraq. Not only did they invade Iraq, but remember, Saddam Hussein was working for the United States. He was an ally of the United States. When Saddam Hussein, in the context in the 1980s of the war between Iran and Iraq, accidentally hit an American naval vessel, killed many American soldiers, Dick Cheney, who was working for Reagan at the time, flew to Saddam Hussein to pat him on the back and say, we know it was an accident, and to hug and be friends. So people forget that Saddam Hussein, like Noriega in Panama, was a stooge of the CIA. He worked on their behalf. He unleashed that cruel war against Iran on behalf of the United States against Ayatollah Khomeini, right? So he was their man. So they decided, okay, we sacrifice him. So they gave him a signal to take Kuwait. And why did he want to take Kuwait? Because the war that he had waged against Iran, on the orders of the United States, had been financed by Kuwait, on the orders of the United States. So the United States had said to Saddam Hussein, invade Iran, and they had said to Kuwait, give Saddam the money. Right? And when that war ended and 1 million people died, the Kuwaiti said to Saddam, give me the money back. And Saddam picked up the phone and said to Washington, what do you mean? I've done this on your behalf. All these people who have died. And the Americans said, oh, no, we don't care. This is between you, bilateral problem that you have with Kuwait. So he gets really across. And he stands, Kuwait is a pipsqueak thing like that. I'll take it. And the Americans, through the American ambassador in Kuwait, signaled to Saddam on purpose, provoking him. They said, the United States will not have a problem if you take Kuwait. So he takes Kuwait. And then, bang! And if this is all established fact, after the surrender of Saddam Hussein during the First Gulf War, the American Air Force was shooting Pershing and cruise missiles and all sorts of missiles into the desert to get rid of the stock so they could replenish it. At some point, Saddam Hussein gets really annoyed and says, I'm going to redenominate the Iraqi oil in euros. And that's when the Americans decided, okay, we'll take him out. So you're right, but there is a longer story which connects to the question of the crisis of American capitalism, European capitalism, and how this all interconnects.
All right. Carl, let's see if they're okay. Unmute your mic, Carl. Let me see. All right, there we are. So give me your take on this, because this has everything to do with the economy and how the service economy continues to work, called capitalism.
I mean, this actually ties to the Ukraine war right now. Ukraine war is spending a lot of shells, lots of ammunitions, which is not supplied by Ukraine's arms industry. It's supplied by U.S. armed industry. And now the U.S. industry have depleted its stockpile of ammunitions. It needs to restock. And this is, if people look at the stock price of Lockheed Martin, for example, or Raytheon, and you will look at where it's at in before February 2022 and where it's today. Or actually look at the stock price of Lockheed Martin before October 7th, 2023, and look at where it's now. It has skyrocketed because US is supplying all the ammunitions to Israel. The arms industry is literally raking it in from all the bombs that's dropped to kill Palestinian children. This is how U.S. capitalism works. The U.S. military-industrial system works. It thrives on inflicting maximum pains on people of other countries. This is why it's kind of ridiculous when people say, "Oh, U.S. is a benign hegemony." I mean, you drank the Kool-Aid, man. You drank the neoliberal Kool-Aid. And if you look at this is another reason I don't think Trump will be able to withdraw from Ukraine, and it's because it's too much profit. There's too much profit motives involved, and also added to the effect that Ukrainian war is not just about Ukraine. It's also about impoverishing Europe to the benefit of United States. Again, it's part of that lighting fire all around the world, so the money continue to come into United States. The German industries can continue to be offshore to U.S. to deindustrialize Germany. That's all part of the plan. This is why I don't think U.S. will wind down Ukraine war anytime soon. I mean, there's still much can be squeezed out of this. So I mean, the Europe. The lemon that's Europe can still be squeezed to make the lemon juice. So this is why I don't think Trump will get U.S. out of Ukraine anytime soon.
I think they wanted to make it as though they probably sue for peace, but not really, because there was a report about 2 years ago, and I talked about it on the show all last year. That came out of the Pentagon and the think tanks. They said that they believed that they only had 8 to 16 months to challenge China to prevent her from overtaking the United States in everything. And we have exceeded that time almost. So they are really fearful of a non-white, non-Western nation becoming the number one economy, the number one military. And I think this is where they believe that if we don't confront China, there's no way we can maintain our position. And I think before they really go head to head with China, I think they're gonna intensify the Middle East to weaken North African nations, to keep Syria or Iraq subjugated, and then to try to bring Iran into submission, to try to break up the BRICS, to try to weaken the Belt and Road, and that way they believe that they can live to see another day. What say you on that?
That's exactly what United States will do. I mean, this is there's not even any departure Trump administration from the Biden administration. They are Trump has always had a hard on for Iran. I mean, he makes no secret about it. He's the one who threw out the U.S. nuclear agreement with Iran in the first place, and he has surrounded himself with a bunch of hawks who wanted U.S. to wage war against Iran. I mean, Iran has always been on target, but again, Iran is not Iraq. Iran is a much more larger country, much larger economy. Iraq was isolated back in 1991. I mean, people probably don't remember this, but in 1991, there were Syrian battalions that was part of the U.S. coalition to go inside Kuwait. Saddam has pissed off sufficiently people around in his region, that U.S. was able to build up a big coalition against Iran. I'm talking about the first Gulf War, not the coalition of the willing of the Bush of the George Bush, right? That's a farce. But the first Persian Gulf War, there was Syrian battalions, on the fighting with the U.S. against Iraq. And this is always, but Iran is a much bigger country. It has more powerful friends. He actually has a backing of Russia and China. So this is not gonna. I mean, if U.S. does wage a war on Iran, it will turn out disastrous. It would be, if you think Iraq war was bad for U.S., this is going to be 10 times worse. I mean, the countless, U.S. Navy can't even deal with Houthis in Red Sea. They think they can take on Iran. I mean, Iran had. Where did all the Yemeni missiles come from? Iran supplied them. Iran has more those in stock. So I mean, U.S. navies in Persian Gulf and U.S. bases in Persian Gulf, they will be sitting ducks for those missiles. And so I don't think it will turn out well. But I will be interested to see how far U.S. is willing to take this confrontation with Iran. Again, a lot of things up in air right now, but I think in the first couple months, U.S. there will be utter chaos inside the U.S. deep state, U.S. institutions, because they're going to see which piece going to fall in the new Trump administration. So I don't expect much to take place in the first couple months. But after that, we'll have to see back, in March, around the March time, that it will be interesting to see how U.S. foreign policy will shape up.
I believe, and we'll close it out in a second. I know he has diaper duty, and I don't want to keep him longer. He's given us 2 hours of his time. He'll be back on the platform, everybody. So don't worry about it. This is my guy right here. But America, Carl. Desperation breeds desperate actions and irrational thought, and the economy is collapsing. I mean, at breakneck speed. Her position internationally is receding and collapsing. Her military is stretched, and she sees Russia as a rival reemerging. She sees Iran establishing itself, and she sees the one thing that she does not want to see out of all of that: China supersedes her in everything, and that, in my eyes, will be the linchpin for regional conflagration in the MENA region, the Middle East and North African region. And I'm not talking about a year from now, because they've been throwing everything up against the wall and nothing is stuck. And so they are feeling that if we just continue to do this, we're going to lose out. But if we do something, we're going to lose out. So it's better to do something and lose out than to not do something and be like, oh, we should have tried this and tried that. So I believe they're going to let everything out of their genie bottle to try to prevent China from, well, it's already overtaken her, but cementing itself as the number one economy. And I think they're going to try to prevent anything that can from stopping Iran from cementing itself as a major linchpin in the Belt and Road. Because remember, Iran sits in West Asia, which is a route to Africa, which is a route to Europe, which is a route to the Mediterranean. And that to have China to have access to all of that stuff, I think desperation sets in and war comes about.
I think one industry in the United States is going to boom in the next 4 years. That's the copium industry. It's going to go through the roof because they will find out nothing they can do is going to stop China's rise. So the copium production is going to intensify. We're going to see copium everywhere. That's what we're looking forward to, guys.
Hey, Carl, my guy. Thank you for joining me on this episode, man. We got to do another one real soon for everybody, man. Hey, send my love to your family. Be safe and be blessed out there, my brother.
Peace.
Mm-hmm. All right, peace. Everybody, thank you all for joining us on another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. Again, I really, really enjoyed the show. I always enjoy Carl, and my mom and my baby daughter, that's their favorite person, guest on the show. And Carl is really a co-host from time to time on the show. So I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me on the most powerful platform for truth, bar none, anywhere on God's green earth. And I want to say to you all right now, have a safe and blessed weekend. Always remember to treat others as you would have them to treat you, and do right by others, not because there's any gain for you or because anybody's watching, but do right to others because it's the right thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching, God Almighty is always watching you. Remember that. I love you all from the bottom of my heart to the depth of my soul, but the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Deuces, everybody. Thank you all for joining me. We're out of here. Peace.